Something more?
I got that. Can you explain why evil does not exist?
Well, now let's be fair. If there is the presence of goodness, then there has to be the absence of goodness.
Right.
And humans want to call that evil and assign it a source, when all it is the byproduct of disallowing the goodness that is the only source. Law of attraction and momentum are the basis of this subject. So when you focus upon something unwanted, there is a momentum to that thought, and if you keep thinking about it, then the momentum is stronger, and as others do, then the momentum is stronger, until there are rivers of thoughts that exist that are the spin-off of man's conscious mind. And so if the river is strong, and there are a lot of those rivers that are strong, there are just so many things that people think about that they don't want. And so when you focus there and get caught up in one of those, it feels like something is asserting itself to you, while nothing does assert itself. So the reason that we like to approach anyone who's beginning to understand vibration from a exercise of meditation is because when you quiet your mind and you stop resistance, we know what will then happen is that your vibration will raise to the frequency of who you are. The reason that we are so sure about this is because we know about this momentum of well-being. Because we have broader view, we can see the preponderance of well-being in relationship to the pinching off of it. In other words, it's not just the big picture considering all things that have been and are, it's the current picture of even what's taking place on your planet right here and now. Well-being is just dominant. Does that mean that someone can't pinch themselves off from it? Certainly not. You can, and when you do, you feel it.
So the devilish functions in the universe, this is what I grew up hearing. I was raised Buddhist, and I always heard this, like, you chant to be protected from the devilish functions in the universe, are just, it's like alignment or out of alignment.
And when you chant to be protected from something unwanted, you say, come to me, this thing I do not want, and prove to me that you exist.
Right. This is fear.
Come to me, this thing I do not want, and prove to me that you exist.
Right. And if you keep chanting, though, you'll be protected from the devilish functions in the universe.
Esther remembers in the very early days of receiving Abraham, of people warning her about things like that. And so she and Jerry had some conversations with us about it. And at first, Esther was only hearing our words. In other words, she could not know. It took a while for her to understand, to feel the vibration of all of this. Esther, from time to time, would hear someone trying to explain to others who Abraham was. And it always made Esther uncomfortable because she knew they were having to overcome all the preconceived notions that everybody was having about it. And she just wanted them to just come and have the experience of Abraham, find the feeling of Abraham, feel the well-being of Abraham, because she knew that was for her what made the difference. In other words, Esther could not feel fear of things that she had learned about as a child and the presence of Abraham at the same time. So when she tuned to the presence of Abraham, all of that went away. And she tuned herself there so significantly that now she knows that that is all that exists. The other is just trumped up reasons to explain disconnection. Take your question further if you can.
Okay. So when a person pinches themselves off so often,
and they do it by focusing on unwanted,
right? And then they take
of wanted.
An action from that place that is evil.
And it even feels inspired to them because it's the next logical step. The momentum has increased it. Yes.
And they would say, the devil told me to do it.
And we would say, the devil is non-existent. The devil is the name that you assign to the absence of the pureness that is you.
Yeah. And so then how do you explain to someone whose mother was burned in a fire at church, like he can't believe that that's source energy, that source energy had anything to do with that? And I can't convince him.
Well,
and I don't try.
Everyone is where they are. And so let's talk about this path of least resistance. So here's someone suffering the loss of someone who really matters. And it's really even more dreadful to him because it happened at church. So here's my mother, my good mother, doing what she and I believe are good things, and then something that I and maybe even she believe is a bad thing happened in the middle of a good thing. So there's a sort of disconnect that goes on there. And so we say, well, first, and it's not easy for you, You got to accept that there is not badness in what you call death. That's the first flaw. First, you got to accept that there is no death. That's really the first flaw, that you are eternal and that you never cease to be. And so this is a question that people have been grappling with personally for a very long time. Why do things that we consider to be bad happen to people who we consider to be good? So we're going to tell you a story. It's going to feel light in relationship to this one, but we'll come back to this one. A woman driving in San Francisco area got stopped by a policeman and was given a ticket. And she is now in the hot seat complaining to us about it. Abraham, I'm a good person, she's saying. And I was in a good place. In fact, I was listening to one of your recordings. And a policeman pulled me over and gave me a very expensive ticket. And we said, what was the infraction? Not wearing my seatbelt. We said, how do you feel about seatbelts? I hate them. I think that they are unnecessary. I think that it is an imposition on our freedom. I think that it is nobody's business whether I wear a seatbelt or not. I think that nobody has any business telling me what to do. And so I don't wear my seatbelt. Sometimes I just pretend to wear it, but I don't believe that I should have to wear a seatbelt. And we said, so here's a policeman. Let's not call him bad or good. Let's call him doing his job, which means he's trolling for money. He's looking for infractors. And here you are driving down the freeway. Now, you say that you're in a place of pure positive energy because you're listening to a recording. But while you were listening to recording, you were emanating a signal that says, I don't wear my seatbelt, and I don't believe that anybody should tell me that I should have to. Because that's your belief and you're radiating it. It's in your vibration. No matter whatever else you're doing, it's in your vibration. So the policeman is driving away looking for exactly what you feel like. A lot of these guys are really intuitive. They know what infractors feel like. They've got their nose tuned to that defiant vibration. And so there you were, the most logical, strongest emanator of that anywhere. So something didn't go wrong. Something went very right. That was law of attraction in action right there. That was you emanated a signal. And we didn't have a long enough conversation for us to really explain to her in a way that she could hear it, that you got to stop emanating that signal. So let's take the subject of path of least resistance. So if you have been held back or held down or confined or disallowed from following your own path and doing what you want, so you feel restrained, you feel restrained, you feel downtrodden, you feel abused, you feel disadvantaged. If you've got that vibration going on, and here's your source over here calling you toward the well-being that is really you, there are a lot of emotions for you to pass through on your way to the delightful feeling of alignment. As we talked about the emotional guidance scale, and we talked about appreciation and love there in the high-flying vibrations, and that feeling of defeat and that feeling of fear being the lower, more resistant vibrations. And so if you are feeling defeat, then anger or resentment or revenge is a step in the right direction, isn't it? And so your inner being is calling you toward the clarity and the fullness that is you. But you can't just jump all of a sudden there. That's too much of a vibrational gap. So the path of least resistance for you might very well be in that attitude of revenge or resentment. And that's where this woman was. But that's a far cry from being in the state of alignment. In other words, she was touting alignment while she was in the state. And so there are a lot of people who are at church who are fearing God. Or there are a lot of people who are at church who are not loving their neighbors or the other people around them. In other words, it doesn't matter where you are, it's how you're feeling. That may very well have been the path of least resistance to what that woman was praying for. She might have been praying for alignment, for escape from something that she could not control. In other words, you can't even know for anybody else. But we can tell you that the death experience is not what humans standing behind are wanting to assign to it. It's time for you to get over that death thing. It's time for you to accept the continuity of the eternalness that is you. It's time for you to stop looking at things that happen and trying to evaluate your worthiness or your rightness or your goodness or anyone else's based upon what you're witnessing, because you don't know for anyone else. You don't know what their path is, and you sure don't know what their path of least resistance is. And so it's one thing for us to stand in this place of understanding your worthiness and loving you unconditionally. And it's another thing for you to be in a vibrational place where you can receive that knowing. And there is very often a big gap between how Source feels about any one of you and the way you think Source feels about you, because you've been using all kinds of bogus criteria to evaluate the goodness and the rightness of you. Most of you evaluate your goodness based upon your sacrifice. It's almost as if you believe that the more of your happiness you give up for someone else, then the more goodness you stand in. And we say, you're always good, but you stand in a place of depriving yourself of the evidence of your alignment when you are using what others need or want from you as your criteria, rather than serving yourself into your own alignment. When you care enough to hold yourself steadily in that place of alignment, then you really have something to give others, but otherwise you do not. So this conversation is a big one. First, you can't convince your friend about this, and we couldn't either, because you are where you are in relationship to where you want to be. Esther remembers when her father made his transition, and her dear sister had been with him night and day for a very long time. She had been there for him to her disadvantage. She was deprived of sleep. She was deprived of just about everything. She was giving everything she had to that. And he was unconscious, had been for a while, and sort of in and out, but mostly out of consciousness. And she finally went home for a desperate shower. And while she was gone, whoosh, off he went. And she was so mad when she got back that he took off while she was gone. And she blamed the attending nurse. You turned up his morphine and you caused this untimely experience. Untimely for me, really timely for him. And Esther explained to her that nothing went wrong, that everything went right, and that it's always the path of least resistance that allows that to happen. You see, of all the things that we've talked about here today, there's nothing that speaks more of the path of least resistance. But you all make your path so resistant that you have to get run over by something really big. You have to be really in a bad place before you'll say, okay, I'll go. Otherwise you're clinging as if you've got one last thing that you need to serve or prove. And we say, lighten up. Be easier about all of this.
Okay.
You can't get it wrong.